Hi everyone. So this video is going to be informational. It's not going to be about 4.0 or anything new. It's actually going to go back to an old skill called binding word. Look at that, through the magic of recording. It's happily there in the middle of the screen when I open it. But no, seriously. If you remember back in, let's say before 3.0, like 2.7, no, even before that, 2.5 was it? There was some point where this was a 2-second cast skill, and it was pretty much a joke because the cast time just made it so unbearable. Actually, stamina. Wow, I just made up a word. Stamina restoration. That skill was also a 2-second cast time, but I'm going on a tangent now. Anyway, this skill is something that I see get used a lot by chanters in a very inefficient way. Namely, I see them usually just toss it at the beginning of a fight or just randomly, like at some point during a fight. There's not really a rhyme or reason to it, they just kind of use it. And while that's kind of acceptable, there are ways to use binding word that are much more effective, I feel, and you'll get a lot more use out of it. So I'm going to go ahead and talk about that. I actually made a little picture because I felt inspired to do it, I guess we can say. Okay, so the first part's going to talk about the kinds of ways you can bury the skill, because I think that's the most basic thing to talk about in terms of using binding word. And it's nice because you can apply burying to other classes and other skills too. The most common is probably from Sorks and Spirit Masters for things like the bind from SMs or the silence from both, or the shackle from SMs and other things from SMs. There's quite a lot. Anyway, our skills, at least our basic chain skills, they have, for the most part, physical debuffs attached to them all, as you can see from Hallowed Strike line. Okay, well, it doesn't show in the dummy, so we're gonna do the magic of cutting out and going to a mob. Okay, so like I was saying, Hallowed Strike, you can use it on a mob and you get a bunch of debuffs. We have Hallowed Strike, Booming Strike, and Booming Smash. Even a Silence proc because, again, magic of recording. And then Meteor Strike, the line, there's also two debuffs. It's Meteor Strike and Incandescent Blow. And these last, well, Meteor Strike doesn't last that long, but Incandescent lasts a decent amount of time. That's like 6 seconds or so. I mean, it tells you right here, doesn't it? 4 seconds, yeah. And the importance of these debuffs is that you can actually use some of them to bury the skill. There's two skills that do not work when it comes to burying. Hallowed Strike is one, because you can't pot that. The other is Booming Smash, which I'll get back to later. But you could do something like this, and that bind would be buried completely from like a pot. You only have 4 seconds for Meteor Strike, but I guarantee you someone will pot before that is up, like most of the time. And that's really good, because if they pot that, they suddenly have no more pot, first of all. And second of all, they didn't even get rid of the thing they wanted to in the first place, which is the annoying shadow out of binding word on your screen. Like I said, like darkens, not shadows it, but same idea. Another thing you could do, I guess, is like, I don't know, let's see, Hallowed Strike, the Booming Strike, and then Meteor Strike, and then Incandescent Blow, and then the Bind, or just Meteor Strike, but no reason not to use one and then not use the next. That's a little more work, so I prefer to usually just do like, what's my preferred way of doing it? Go to this mob. One, Hallowed Strike. Oops, I messed it up. We'll try that again in a second when my Hallowed Strike is back up. Doing this as spontaneously as possible. Okay, I like to go up to Booming Strike and then Meteor Strike, Incandescent Blow, and then Binding Word. This is a really effective way of doing it because it's really like deep buried, but you also use all your chain skills except for Booming Smash. So that's really cool. And that's my like favorite way of doing it. Okay, going back to Booming Smash, I'll point out something right now. The skill is also a snare, which is pretty cool because it lasts, I believe, 6 seconds. I could confirm that by just looking at it. But the problem with that is that, oh wow, it's 8 seconds, that's even better. But the problem is that it doesn't stack with Binding Word because this is also a snare on top of a bind. And the stacking order is actually Booming Smash above Binding Word. So if you do something like this, which I tend to do time and again, where you get Booming Strike and then you accidentally use Binding Word, it doesn't work. It tells you it conflicts. And I'll say at times in my videos, you know, oh crap, I used the bind into the snare. And I'm not using names or any jargon, but I basically mean I use Binding Word into Booming Smash. And if you use Binding Word first and then Booming Smash, the same thing happens. So you have to really be careful when it comes to those skills. And the next thing actually is that there are a couple of skills that don't work with it. Mountain Crash for one. The dot and Hallowed Strike, like I said before. You can't pot these, so they have no impact on like actually burying the bind. You just have to remember that. Mountain Crash is a dot, but it's not a debuff, which is kind of a weird thing. Because dots usually are potable and then therefore count as debuffs. I guess it kind of technically is, but not really. Oh yeah, I also stigma with Numbing Blow, of course. This one you can pot, so again, you could do... There we go. Numbing Blow behind, Booming Strike, Meteor Strike, or Incandescent Blow. Also an acceptable way of covering the bind. This won't work on every class. There are exceptions. Let's say gladiators with strengthened wings. If they pop that, it gets rid of the bind, no problem. If they have it up, there's a good chance they'll resist the bind because it's again a snare. Clerics, they can just dispel it, so there's not really a point. And it doesn't do too much because, I mean, the snare is nice, but again, they're clerics. Other chanters, if they're paying attention at all and like they really care about this kind of thing, they'll use their single dispel and then pot and get rid of everything. Or they can just pot and just single dispel the bind. I mean, it's up to them, but chanters sometimes is like they can be tricky, but usually you can get away with it because it's not, again, something that I don't see utilized too often. So I don't think people are used to having to be like, oh, well, there's two debuffs inside of the bind or in front of the bind. Sorry, I guess I should dispel something and then pot, or vice versa. You could argue that it's not too critical because it's only 5 seconds, but in PvP every second counts, and I will basically die with that statement. That I will not like falter from that. Every second does count, and whatever you do, like 1 second will impact the next, and blah blah blah. I don't have to go into that. Okay, so we've covered our bases, right? We have, or I've talked about the debuffs you can use that will bury it, the debuffs that will not, and then finally, things to avoid and to watch out for. Transition into Pernon. Alright, so that does it for this video. I hope it was useful if you were a chanter, and if not, at least interesting. I'll put a link in the description to a blog that I made. It's going to be called Chanter Talk, kind of like the video, and it's going to focus on chanter related things, mostly PvP probably. I'll link other videos I find, ideas I have, etc. But that'll be there, so if you ever want to check it out, then that's cool. And other than that, take care, and 4.0 is so soon. Oh yeah.